the Quinn Marr Show.
This show is brought to you by Bing Pot Trivia. How many times have you been to a trivia night where it just felt like somebody reading questions? Well, Bing Pot Trivia prides themselves on bringing high-energy, dynamic hosts to every event. The show leans heavily on visual elements. Their questions are designed to make you laugh or roll your eyes, while also challenging your knowledge on pop culture, high school science, culinary arts, and everything in between. Their typical show runs 5 rounds, including a photo round, general knowledge on pop culture, riffs on different game shows, absurd 50-50 questions, and a super sweet music round. Check out bingpottrivia.com today to book your trivia night. Again, that is at bingpottrivia.com. Tell my boy Danny that your friend Quinn sent you. All right, let's get on with the show. My next guest has been around the entertainment circuit for over 25 years. He's worked alongside some heavy hitters in that entertainment industry, like Zach Galifianakis, Bob Odenkirk, Kevin James, Bobby Lee, and more. He's a director, he's a writer, and an actor who's been part of some legendary TV shows and movies. But to me, there's one role that sticks out the most. Mr. Bender on Zoey 101. It is my pleasure to welcome to the Quinn Marr Show, Michael Blieden. Michael, how's it going?
Really good. Yeah, that iconic Mr. Bender role. Yeah, that's like, is that a heyday reference for you? Were you watching Zoey 101 when you were a kid?
Yes. Yes, that Nickelodeon, Family Channel / Disney Channel, and like YTV were like the staples in my house when I was a kid. 100%. Like Zoey 101 is up there with one of my favorite shows from being a kid, easily.
It's funny as an actor. I had a concept of like what children's shows, or that wasn't a children's show, but like what acting for, I don't know, a younger audience was like.
Yeah.
And a friend of mine, Eric, was a writer on that show, and he said, "Hey, I wrote a part for you, but you have to come audition for it." I was like, "All right." So I remember like rehearsing it in this very real conversational style. As an actor, I tended to just talk exactly like I'm talking to you now. There's never a difference between my like my proscenium voice and then like my regular conversational voice.
Right.
And they shot those shows at Pepperdine University for the first couple seasons. And when I arrived, there was a sign that said no swearing. I don't know if it's because it's a Christian campus or because it's a kids show. But that was the first thing that like it lodged in my subconscious as like, you're leaving your adult persona behind in this moment and you're entering a different world. And then I had not planned to do this, but then at the audition, I just started acting like adults act when they're acting on a kids show. It was so weird. I didn't plan it. I just was like, "Hey guys," like really animated.
Of course, yeah. That's funny. And that was it. That was the only really kid show you had done, right?
Only one I ever did.
That's so random. And it's funny that like me being 27, that like to me that's the thing that you're known for me. But we're gonna get into a lot more because there is a ton of stuff that I learned over the last few weeks about you. But like to me, that was like, oh yeah, that's like if I saw your face, I'd be like, that's Mr. Bender from Zoey 101.
Quinn, I know nothing about you. Why are you doing the show?
I'm not
deal?
that interesting. What I tell people why I do the show is there's no one I know more that misses being a kid more than me, that I know 100%. Just like everything about being a kid, I miss it so much. And I thought it would be cool to be able to talk to people that helped shape my childhood and were part of it, to kind of bring back that feeling as much as like is possible of being a kid, as well as like learning about those people besides what I know them for. So that was kind of like how I came up with the idea for the show.
Wow. Did you have like a loving household upbringing?
Yeah, I did.
That's awesome.
Yeah. I'm gonna guess you didn't, by the way you're saying that.
No, I did. I mean, I had a really wonderful middle-class upbringing. My parents were like super solid, I keep saying middle class. I feel like it's kind of like ideal. You have access to the whole world. If you grow up in a certain socioeconomic zone, you kind of have access to the whole world. You're not like sheltered, but you're comfortable.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know. I felt like I grew up like a Midwest middle class kid with like snow on the ground, and like both my parents were around and they're still together.
Yeah.
And I don't know. It gave me it's part of a pretty solid foundation. But the childhood magic thing, it's something that I don't think about in my life. And I think that as comfortable as my childhood was, I don't look back on it with the same level of magic. And now that I've got like a 4-year-old, a 4.5-year-old, it's almost overwhelming to me and so profound that I'm like, this is his childhood, the childhood that is the thing that is the basis for your life. He's having it now.
Right.
And so, it's been so front of mind for me to like make every day have something to make him light up. Like no one ever bought me comic books. I missed comic books as a kid.
Oh yeah.
And when I was like in my 20s, I was like, why the fuck did I never get comics? Like they're like that, like that whole visual part of my brain just never got nurtured. And I tried to start buying them late in life, but I really missed when they like really could be impactful. And
were you a fan? Like, were you a comic book fan as a kid?
No, I didn't even like know they were a thing really. Like,
oh, so it's not even like you were like sitting at home, which like thinking, motherfucker, they haven't bought me a comic book yet. Like you just didn't really like think about them at the time. But like now that you think about it now, you're like, oh, I would have been a fan of comic books back then.
I would have loved comic books.
Interesting.
I would have loved them.
Okay, so maybe not comic books then, but like a young Michael, like what were you into? Like what was your number one thing? Like were you like big into movies? Were you into the sports, video games? Like what was like your thing or your things?
Plural? Well, I was quite singularly focused when I was a kid. I knew I was going to go into entertainment. Like I knew at a very, very young age. And I think that's like what I focused on, making that an unmiraculous outcome. I kind of focused on, look, I'm going to visualize this and I'll just make it happen. I knew I was a kid. I was an actor when I was 10. I lived in LA for a while as a kid, and my mom signed me up for the LA Children's Public Theater, and I loved it. I loved performing, and I mean that definitely set me on a path. And there was just not going to really be a backup option from there. So, I was like into comedy. When I was in high school, the thing was Python. Now Python was on reruns,
right?
But that was still in my friend group. It was Letterman and Python. Letterman was on the air, and but like, we knew all that was like what influenced me the most.
Were you a class clown, or were you like the shy fan of comedy?
I was totally a class clown to my own detriment. This really interesting relationship with my best friend. His name was Jason, and he was the coolest guy in my school. At least I thought so. And he was always in the back watching, and I was always in the front performing. Nice. And I always wanted to trade places with him. Fair. I always thought like I knew even at a young age, I was like, oh, he's not like desperate and sweaty for the attention.
Right.
He's just able to enjoy this, whatever fart noise I'm making, and he's able to laugh at it.
The coolness just like oozed out of him.
So cool.
Yeah. Were you in the front though because you wanted to, or because you would get in trouble and you'd be moved to the front? Because that was my problem. I never wanted to be in the front. I got moved.
I desperately wanted to be the center of attention.
Oh, but so did I. But I was in the back of the class, like where you could get away with it at first. But then once like the teacher got fed up, they're like, you know what, fuck this. You're sitting at the front now. That's what would happen with me. But then I would put on more of an act now that I'm at the front, because I have everybody around me, and I'm right there in the middle, in the front, ready to entertain. So that was my problem. What I want to know is, so you grew up on Long Island. So how did you go from Long Island to LA? And before you answer that one, your parents, like growing up, what did they do for work? Did it have anything to do with entertainment?
No. I was born on Long Island because my dad was a physics professor at Stony Brook College, and he didn't get tenure. It's interesting to like signposts that become like a pivotal moment in your life. You're not in control of them. You don't know why they happen. But any professor wants tenure. My dad didn't get it, so he went to work for the government. He went to work for Jimmy Carter in the Alternative Energy Commission, worked on space-based solar applications for the Carter administration.
Wow.
And my mom, she was stay-at-home mom until freshman year of high school, and then she went back to school and became a psychoanalyst. But that's why we left Long Island when I was really young and moved to Bethesda when he worked for the government. And then he went to work for Arco. Atlantic Richfield was a oil company, but they had a solar division. So he went to work for Arco Solar. And then he went to work for a small solar startup in Michigan in the early 80s. And that's why we moved to Michigan. So I grew up in New York, Bethesda, Los Angeles, and Detroit suburbs.
Wow. Okay. So it must have been pretty different though, going to LA after the other places, because it would be a huge lifestyle change, right?
Yeah. My memory is that I loved it. I was 5.
Right.
And I got a red line BMX, a red line pro line. Like I was into BMX, as a kid, and red line was like the cool brand of BMX bike. So I was 5, had a sweet BMX bike.
Yeah.
And I remember like never wanting to leave Los Angeles. Started acting there as a kid, and then we moved to Michigan. Wasn't psyched about it, but then I got nature. I sort of left like the kid acting thing behind and just like got a job at the local nature center down the street. And I would, my job was to fill jars of honey. They had like all these, I don't know, this is not interesting, but anyways.
No, I want to hear it. I want to hear it.
It was just a different environment. It was like, I went from LA, which was already a sophisticated and difficult place, like, even 3rd, 4th grade, like there were gang-ish kids at my school. I don't know how to describe. I was friends with them, but like I could see that there was something rough ahead, and I wasn't too worried about it, but I could like sort of see the trajectory. And then I went to Michigan, and it was really different. And in the end, I was actually quite glad to have been taken out of this environment and taken to the Midwest, where I could like, go to the nature center, can honey, raise snapping turtles. It was, and also I think if you're from the Midwest, you just get in touch with like a different sensibility. I think Midwesterners are a little bit better with irony, and being forced to be inside for most of the year. I think you just become a little more creative.
It's fair. That's my problem, because I'm from Ontario, so yeah, but a lot of the time during the year it is cold.
Yeah.
I'm near Toronto, so yeah, I have the exact same problem. So then for you, totally switching, going from the LA lifestyle, the nice warm weather acting, to filling jars of honey in Michigan, did you just like, I know you mentioned you kind of were okay with like giving up the acting, but like later on, was it got to a point where you're like, you know what, actually I miss this? Or did you still always do it behind the scenes?
You look at your life, you look at long arcs of time in your life where you know that certain outcomes were predetermined in a sense. And I'm going to jump forward. When I got to LA, I actually didn't get to LA for good until I was like 29. There were a lot of stops along the way, but I always knew that Los Angeles was my final destination. And when I got here, I actually remember I drove here with a comedy partner of mine, a guy named Jason Nash. And we drove my 1997 Stanza from Detroit to LA. And there's this point where you're driving into LA, if you're coming in from the east on the 10, and you come in through the foothills, there's like a big barbecue restaurant on your right, and you come over the foothills, and then the LA basin just like unfolds in front of you. And I was keenly aware at that time that a 20-year journey had been completed.
Right.
That I was like, I was at the final stop on the train for me creatively, and that I was now allowed to flourish and plant roots. And I had taken a lot of time to get there. For college, it was accidental. I only got into one school, which is University of Michigan. So I had to stay in Michigan for another 4 years. My freshman year, I would lay on the ground in my dorm room under the window. So the window sill was here, and I'd look at the sky, and I would imagine that I was in Los Angeles, and that the sky I was looking at was the sky over Los Angeles. because I was so desperate to be done with that phase of my life.
What were you in school for?
I guess nominally I was an English major, but I got all D's in college because I never went to class and I never studied. I did comedy. I performed improv, sketch comedy, and I took all the film production classes I could. So I was always making, always performing. And I made a deal with myself. I was like, I'll tell you, I didn't have enough self-confidence to drop out of college, but I wanted to. I don't think college is necessary. If you're going to go in entertainment, you don't need a degree. And I think it's kind of pointless unless you can like get some good production experience or meet some great people that you're going to hook up with and make comedy with or drive,
Right.
If the creative experience is worth it, great. If you just want to go to college and party and you're like honest with yourself about that, that's fine too. But college just is not necessary. I think that's not a controversial thing to say now, but it was like, it was a little bit of a non-consensus view in 1989. So I felt like I had to at least have that worthless degree. And so I said, look, well, if you get all D's, you still get the degree, and then you can do all the stuff you want to do in school. So I got pretty much by the time I was done, I got pretty much all D's, but I did graduate. And I thought I have to do one more stop before I go to LA. As my improv group moved to New York City after college. And I was like, I know LA isn't going anywhere. Like I don't know anyone. It's a machine. No one there cares if I come now or in 10 years, but like the chance to be young and running around on the streets and doing improv with like a bunch of idiots that I knew in college was like, that was a time specific opportunity that would never come again.
That just sounds fun, to be honest.
It was awesome.
Yeah, it sounds like it would be a fun thing to do. And this is a comedy company.
Well, it was. Do you mean my friends?
Yeah, because I read you're an alumnus of Comedy Company. Is that what?
Yeah, I was comedy. That's Comedy Company is the University of Michigan Student Activities sketch group. But then we started our own improv group.
Oh,
and so that was separate from Comedy Company.
Got you. Okay. So then when you went going to New York, was it like once you got there, you're like, yeah, this was a no-brainer?
Yeah, it was so romantic. Like everything in New York is romantic. Like being poor in New York is romantic. Being cold is romantic. It was. I'm not in my bones a New Yorker, and I knew that from the beginning. But I felt like I had to have that experience, and I stretched it out. I was there for 6 years, and then finally, I was like, okay, it's time. You've done enough prep. You've done enough research, so it's time to like. Here's the thing about New York. I don't know if this is still true, but there wasn't really any work there. Wasn't really any TV work in New York in the 90s.
Really?
Comedy Central was there. Yeah. MTV was there. Comedy Central was there. But like to speak of, there just weren't that many jobs, especially on like a comparative scale to LA. And the result of that is that no one's judged based on whether they're working or not. That's just like not the criteria that anyone uses. You're judged solely based on your creative output. So you could like do a sketch show on the Lower East Side and have 10 people there. And if it's brilliant, like you get cachet in the community because you did something that was good and people heard about it. So it was a great way to like find my voice and figure out who I was. I spent 6 years doing comedy every single night, living in a, tiny studio apartment and understanding like what I thought was the right thing, like just what I thought was funny, what I was good at. I was kind of a good straight man. It was like what I developed is like into like a comedy straight man, and also knowing that I like drama as well. And so I was like, well, it's time. It's time to compete in the job market now. It's like I was getting close to my 30th birthday, and I felt like, yeah, okay, you're that was my grad school. It's time to go out there and compete. And in LA, it's much more about if you're working, it's like you can put up a great theater show and it can be great. And it's not like no one cares, but like you judge yourself based on if you're supporting yourself, to be in LA and to not be able to support yourself in the craft is hard. And I didn't feel like I was ready to face that pressure until I was about 30. And you know, so I'll tell you something, for dudes, I think it's different for women. For dudes, I don't think like breaks come really until after your 30th birthday. No one in my cohort like had success until after they turned 30.
Well, that makes me feel better because I'm not 30 yet, and I feel like I haven't done much. So that makes me feel better.
Or where are you based out of?
So I live in like near Toronto. So
I think that men in LA, I can't speak about like Toronto, but in LA, men are in a state of adolescence until age 35. Like,
Yeah.
and I mean that quite literally. It's like
Yeah.
they're children until they turn 35.
Right.
I tell all my women friends who are dating, like, just so you know, the men you'll meet are children until they're age 85.
Right.
And it wasn't until like, or 35, not 85.
I know what you meant.
Thanks. So it was like around the right timing for me. And here's the other thing is that like when you're 20s, no one gets jobs. In your 30s, people start working. I never got a break, like a big break from like an upperclassman. All my big breaks in my career came from people my own age who I had already known for 10 years. So like, it wasn't until I turned 30 and everyone else turned 30 that we started, oh, I got a web series. We have $15,000. Oh, Blieden shoots things. Like that was when I started actually working as a director, because everyone I knew started getting little nibbles. And so that's like the thing that I tell like young people in the business the most is, especially people who are just out of school or not going to school or in their 20s. I'm like, be nice to everyone that you're making short films with right now, because none of you are going to have jobs until you turn 30. And then suddenly when you turn 30, that like cool person who's like also just as broke as you is going to give you your big break. You're going to get your big break from the other freshmen. You're not going to get it from the seniors. And that was totally everything major that happened for me came from like my first, I'd say like my first big job financially, where like I could like sit back and like actually pay off my credit cards, was Late Night with Jimmy Fallon. And I got that job because 80 Miles, who I knew when I was doing sketches on the lower, he was like 80 Miles had this partner named Bobby Tisdale, and they were a comedy team in the early 90s on the Lower East Side. And I'd known him since like 95. He was the first friend I knew who got married. He was so young.
Wow.
And then 2009, I walk into his house in LA that he was renting, and he's like, "Oh my gosh, Blieden, I just got a job as the head writer for Jimmy Fallon, and we need someone on staff who can like direct all the short films. I didn't even think of you. Are you interested?" I was like, "Fuck yeah, I'm interested."
Yeah.
And so like 5 days later, I was on a plane to New York, and I moved to New York. But again, I had known him at that point. I'd known him for 15 years. So, you know, you have to be kind to everyone and assume everyone around you is going to be successful, and that's those relationships are going to be your bread and butter in a decade.
Well, like I had mentioned about like some of the big names you've worked with, like you were working with Zach Galifianakis before, like he was this Zach Galifianakis. So
yeah,
like, how did you meet him?
Same place. He was doing comedy at there's a place called Luna Lounge on the Lower East Side. And when I showed up there, it was like it had been established as like the spot for alternative comedy in New York. And it was like Zach was really young. He was doing comedy there, and he was so obviously a star. Like everyone was infatuated with him because he was so captivating and so funny and so his own voice. So that was like 94, 95. Mark Maron was there. Janine Garofalo was there. She had already been famous and was now like lending credibility to that scene. But all these people that I'm thinking of, Bobby and 80 Miles, they all came from that same place. And so I saw Zach doing comedy going back to like when I first moved to New York in 95. And then you jump ahead to 2004, Patton Oswalt said, "Hey, I want to do a, it was like right around the time that Louis C.K. had done his own either a comedy album or a comedy DVD. I don't remember. And he'd sold it on his website, and it was kind of paradigm shifting. No one had like sold their own album before.
You always needed somebody like the big machine to do it for you.
Yeah.
Right.
And so Patton said, oh, maybe I can do that. And so he, if I can like bust through this really quickly, I wrote a movie called Melvin Goes to Dinner, and Michael Penn did the soundtrack. And after the movie was done, I started filming all Michael's shows because he was making an album that was beautiful. And I was thinking about making a documentary about his album. So I was shooting all of his shows, and Patton would open for Michael Penn.
Oh, no way.
All this footage of Patton. And Patton, again, is the same thing I'm telling you manifests itself again and again. Patton was like, hey, I always see Blieden shooting shows, and I want to do my own concert DVD. And I said, well, I had spent, when I was in New York, my day job was, I was a promo producer at HBO On Air Promotions, because I had all this like great production experience from college, and I had a really good reel, and I'd edited a lot already. So I got a job. My first job was I was the PA for the Delta Airlines in-flight entertainment news show.
What the hell?
And the staff was me and this woman named Pam Simpson, who was very sweet, and she took me under her wing. And we would, she'd like write copy, and we'd go into the studio, and there'd be a host. Kathleen Kinley was the host, and then we'd get these news packages from E, and we just like recut them, and then it'd go on Delta Airlines. So 6 months into that, Pam moved on to other things. So then I became the producer of the show, right out of college. And I remember I got paid $1,000 a week, and I was like, "What the fuck is happening? $1,000?
I'm rich.
Dollars?
Right.
Like I never imagined that I would make 1,000 whole US dollars in a week."
Right.
And so then, but then I transitioned to this really interesting job after that. I worked for a division of the HBO promos, and I know this is probably pretty dry, but I think it's good intel for people out there who are putting projects together. I'm sure this division doesn't exist, but the BAP was like an internal ad agency within On Air Promotions, and what they did was they did a lot of promos that never aired. They were things like, for example, every year they'd bring all the cable affiliates like into one room and be like, thanks for carrying our HBO signal on your cable channel. Here's what's coming up. And these were really, really big budget tapes that would like have one audience and one viewing. And what it ingrained in me is that it's really worthwhile that like corporations spend a lot of money to promote themselves to a small but influential audience. Right. It is worth your time to put a lot of money and effort into a single presentation that no one will ever see. So when Patton said, I want to make a DVD, Ted Sarandos had been really friendly to the production Melvin Goes to Dinner, and he'd thrown a party for us for our DVD release. And in talking to him, I knew that he was interested in maybe producing original content for Netflix. So I said, we're going to go on the road, me and you, and Zach, and I'll cut it together, and we'll show it to Ted as a pitch to do it all over again as a bigger budget funded thing. And a friend of mine / partner at the time, this guy named DJ Paul, he funded that little tape. We went on the road, went to Athens, Georgia, Baltimore, one other city, did a 3-city tour. I shot the whole thing, cut it together. And we had a meeting with Ted, and we showed him this 20-minute mini documentary. And he said in the room, he said, oh, I'm in, I'd love to do it. And then, so that became The Comedians of Comedy, which was Netflix's first ever original production. And that was crazy. Patton and Zach and Maria Bamford and Brian Posehn.
Wow.
So it's like, you see all these, you accumulate experience in your life, and you learn like how to make a presentation, how to put all that time in. I mean, there's a lot of work to put a presentation for something that no one except Ted Sarandos has ever seen, right. But it totally worked. I'll stop talking. I feel like I've been.
No, that's literally the reason I have you on, is for you to talk. I didn't know that it was Netflix's first original. Wow. Huh. That's interesting. And back then, like with like editing and stuff, like was this something you were just like doing at home, like when you had to like cut it all together? Or
Yeah, I
did you
mean,
have access to like stuff like at like work?
one of the reasons why I always tell people that like film school isn't necessary is because I think I'm the first generation of directors that came of age with the DVX 100 and Final Cut.
Mm-hmm.
So like I very much defined my career by like which camera I was using for which period of time.
Mm-hmm.
And Sony XL1, the red high 8 camera was like the shit. And I had one of those. I was like, I saved up for it when I'm working at HBO and I bought it. And my grandmother died when I was in college, and love you, Grandma. She left me $20,000.
Oh,
and that was in 1993 money.
jeez.
And I didn't spend any of it until like 97. And I turned to my comedy partner and said, we're going to make a pilot and I'll pay for it. And so I spent it all on this pilot that we shot with my XL1.
What was the pilot?
It was called Real Estate, and it was about three real estate brokers in Manhattan. And it was a super solid idea. It was like very much verite style, doc style. It was all scripted, but it was like in that verite style. But like The Office hadn't come out. I think Real World, the style of Real World, like opened the door for verite style scripted comedies to happen.
Mm-hmm.
You look at like things like The Office, you know, that was obviously the British Office, but like none of that came out until Real World started becoming a phenomenon. And then people were like making fun of it, or they're parodying Real World, but in a scripted way.
Yep.
But none of that was a thing yet. But I must have seen something that influenced me, but because I love that style. I'd say also, anyways, I don't know which track to take. Should I go down the which cameras I've used path, or the pilots I've made path?
There's a lot to unfold. You have like I said, like once I actually like did a lot more research like into you, there was a lot of things that I'm like, you should see what I have here on my computer, just a list of stuff that I wanted to get into, like, and we have been. It's you've been around. It's crazy, and the people you work with and the shows you worked on, just it's nuts. So another thing I want to get into, you mentioned it, was Jason Nash. And for me, Jason Nash is from Vine, TikTok, David Dobrik's vlogs, and now he's he's TikTok live guy. That's his thing now. So with you working with Jason back in the day, what kind of like partner was he with you? Because you did a movie together. You did Jason Nash is Married.
Yeah, I gotta. If you're a fan of Jason Nash, as I am, man, if you could have seen him in the early 90s in New York when he showed up, he was electrifying. He was like the world's biggest star in comedy.
Really?
He was so fantastic. The first thing he started doing was he had all these friends he lived with. They had this apartment they called the Commune, because there was always people sleeping on couches. It was too many people. It was in Hell's Kitchen on 9th Avenue between 45th and 46th. And they were the band, and he was the Reverend Nash, and he would start the show in this suit, and it was like a character. I mean, Jason was like 23, and he's doing a character that was like a 40, 45, 55-year-old man.
Mm-hmm.
And it was such a good character. And he would do sermons, and he'd have guests on, and then he'd do a big sermon, and he'd always end up taking his shirt off, and he'd end the show drenched in sweat. Like, and the band would do like, it was like a James Brown style funk accompaniment band, and they would accompany him. And like, it was just the best stuff I'd ever seen. And he was so devastatingly funny, and I idolized him. And me and my friend Matt Price, who was in my college comedy group, we approached Jason and asked him if he wanted to do improv with us. And so he said yes. And so we started like fucking around, and we did improv. We were so bad. The three of us were so bad at it. I mean, Matt and I had done improv a lot, and I think Matt and I were very good at it, but the three of us together weren't good at it. but we did start writing sketches. And so we started doing, as Price, Nash, and Blieden, we started a 3-man sketch show, which we did for a bunch of years. Mostly we did it at Catch a Rising Star on 28th Street. That was like our home for a long time. And then we moved to, there's a black box theater off Times Square. I forget the name of that, but we did these shows, like sketch shows. And because this is before YouTube, this was how you got discovered in comedy. You just had to do live shows all the time. If we were all coming up in this day and age, we'd make YouTube videos, but we didn't have that. So at some point, we all felt like we could get a deal. This is the age of the comedy deal. We're like, you'd have an act, you'd go to Montreal Comedy Festival, you'd do your act, and you'd get a big sitcom deal, and then you go to LA. And we felt like there was a little bit of interest in us, just a little bit. And so we said, we're going to go to LA and we're going to get a deal. So that was actually what happened. I had already gotten a couple writing jobs in LA. Like my writing career had just began. And so I had a studio apartment in Los Feliz. And so the three of us went to LA. We met Matt there. Nash and I got my car. We drove across the country. We made a bunch of videos on the way out. I still have them. In fact,
that's cool.
I'm in this like retrospective phase of my life where I'm like looking back, and I've got all these tapes when me and Nash drove out to.
That's so cool.
It's so cool. So I want to digitize all that and like do something with it. Yeah, but you know, I guess the takeaway is like Jason Nash arrived on the comedy scene in New York City in the 90s and he was just a giant star. And again, I say this in the context of a world where you weren't judged on whether or not your shows made money, although his shows were always packed. You were just judged on how good it was. And I know that being in LA was different because Jason's personality was so large and his sense of humor was so unique. And like to cram that into an audition for a sitcom role is like a different skill. And that was harder for him. That was harder for all of us really, but harder for him. And so, you know, his career took like a different path, but like, if you're a fan of his, if you could have been there when he arrived, it was something magical. It was magical. Right. It was incredible.
So then what did you think then, like when you saw him on like a Vine, like, or on an app like Vine, were you thinking like, what the hell is he doing now?
No, I knew exactly what he was doing. You know, he was actually like able to be himself.
Right.
Like,
I mean, it's kind of like doing what you guys are doing, but being able to record it from a computer in your pocket.
It's how his personality was able to come through. Like, you know, Matt and Jason and I, we went through we lived together. For Matt and I lived together for 5 years. Jason, Matt and I lived together for almost 2. And we got a deal to develop a late night show for the three of us on Fox. And we wrote like we did a big sketch show presentation, and that we're passed over for that. But in our presentation, we did one sketch that was just the three of us in our apartment that I directed. And someone from Warner Brothers saw that and said, well, we like the three of you maybe doing a sitcom. So then we got another deal to write a sitcom for the three of us. So like those two deals took us through our first like 2 years together in LA, where we were able to just like sit in an apartment and write. And by the way, like our first deal, our late night deal, I remember they called and offered us, we thought, oh, we're going to move to LA and get a deal. So Nash had gotten a big development deal already. So he like had a little bit of money to live. But me and Matt, we were like working day jobs. I was working as an editor and Matt was writing copy, sports copy. And this call came through that they're offering you guys $45,000 for the year as like a holding deal. So that's $15,000 a piece before taxes and commissions in the year like 99. And we're all like, that is not enough. $15,000 is not enough to live for a year.
No.
But I was really conscious of the fact that for the first time, someone was recognizing us as a comedy entity and was trying to take us off the market. And I think we closed the deal like a little bit higher, but it was still like, living was very threadbare. And I did, but I booked a couple commercials, so I was able to survive.
Nice.
Anyways, was I telling you something? Was I like on a path to answer?
We're talking about just Jason and like him being on Vine, and then later on you guys doing Jason Nash is Married, and then he totally like blew up with being on David's vlogs. Did you ever watch any of David Dobrik's vlogs? Have you ever seen any?
No.
Do you know anything about him?
Nope.
Holy man, like the things like Jason would do anything and everything basically that David asked him to do in this. Like they would tape him to the wall, they would make him shave his eyebrows. Like he just did everything, whatever. And David's my age, so it's funny that like 20-something-year-old difference.
Yeah.
That and these two were just like, yeah, I think David did like hundreds, probably close to like 500, 600 vlogs, and Jason was in almost every single one of them.
That's awesome.
Yeah, and like I had found Jason and David both from Vine, and then later on, obviously YouTube. But yeah, it's funny hearing the Jason that like personally versus the one I know from watching David's vlogs or now seeing him on TikTok. Because do you know now that he's like the TikTok live guy? Have you heard any of this?
Well, I just talked to him the other day, and like we got cut up a little bit, and I was like, well, what's your thing? Because I really am not on social media at all. And he was like, he just wanted to brush past it. He's like, oh, I do a lot of live stuff and, whatever platforms work in, but what's up with you? He just like, didn't give me
a lot of people are giving him shit for it.
Really?
Is what it is. Yeah. He's getting a lot. I see it everywhere. People are just giving him shit about being like 50 something on TikTok live doing like these little battles and stuff. So that's probably why he didn't really want to talk about it too much. There's a lot of shit people give him.
He is and remains one of the funniest people I've ever worked with.
Yeah.
As like a human.
Yeah.
It comes back to me so vividly. I mean, we lived together right when I turned 30, right when like all the stuff that I described to you that happens to like a male in entertainment in terms of like coming of age, like it happened to me and Jason together. That's awesome. He gravitated towards a medium that allowed him to do whatever the fuck he wanted to do.
God, yeah. And Vine is obviously where he blew up because like he had millions and millions and millions of followers like pretty quickly after Vine had started, and then it kind of just snowballed after that. He just got bigger and bigger. And then it would have been in the middle of that you guys had done Jason Nash is Married, I think.
He asked me, he started that as a web series. And then I came in and directed that for him. And, but I wasn't really clued into what he was doing.
Yeah. I would love, sorry to interrupt. I would love for you to just sit down and watch some of David's vlogs and see, like, you literally just search up Jason Nash, David vlogs best moments. I feel like, I mean, even though you like know him, I feel like you'd be like surprised to be like, holy shit, he was really doing all this stuff. Cause there was a lot of shit he was doing. It's crazy.
Yeah. I'd like to see that.
Yeah. I mean, you should. And if you do, please let me know. I would love to hear your thoughts on it from a guy who's like his friend and like knows him to see like, this is what he's doing. Or was doing, I guess. David doesn't do the vlogs anymore, but and then he even was on a podcast. They did a podcast together, him and Dobrik, Views, and that went for a while. And that was one of my favorite podcasts. Like, yeah, Jason is just like really, really talented, and this coming from a guy that just like watches his content, that just like, yeah, he is. He seems like a funny bastard.
He's legit. Yeah. He really is.
Yeah. I mean, and he's been doing it for a long time, clearly. I mean, so have you, but that's funny that you don't know any of that stuff that he's been doing.
I don't really watch anything. It's one of the ironies of like
really
being in television. Yeah. Like, it's like, if we got to talking, I would cite a lot of things that were influential on me. And I'm sure I've watched like enough.
Right.
To be conversant. So it's not like I've watched zero things in my life, but I'm not a television and movie consumer. I go through periods, and especially since I've had kids, I quite literally have almost watched nothing.
True.
But I just don't watch. I just don't watch that much. I never have. I think like as a filmmaker, it's, I don't know. I'm conflicted a little bit because on the one hand, I feel like you don't need to have seen anything. You just need to like the things that you like, watch them like 10 times, and that's
Mhm.
enough. But you don't
Mhm.
need to have like an encyclopedic knowledge of everything ever made. The
Mhm.
average person is going to grow up and have seen plenty to know what their frame of reference is. But as I say that, it's probably actually better to watch as much as you physically can. It's probably smarter and better
I
if you want to be a
mean,
director.
yeah, I mean, that's fair, but at the same time, you've been successful as a director on doing it on the flip side. So, I mean, I feel like it could go either way. It depends on the person. Did you know then that you and Jason are both Nickelodeon alumni?
Was he an alumni?
He was in one scene or maybe a couple scenes of Drake and Josh.
I
So
didn't
he
know that.
is technically an alumni of Nickelodeon as
That's
well.
funny.
Yeah.
I started making things actually. It was never because I loved watching things. It was I relish the making process. I'm a creature of set. Always been on set. All my life, I've owned cameras. Love shooting with them. Love editing. And so it's just been like I've been a creature of production always. And I in fact actually the things I like watching the most are the things I make. If I make something,
Hey,
I'll
that's
watch it
good though.
over. I'll watch it over and over and over and over again.
And now, are you watching it though as a critic or as
No,
just
I
like
think
a?
it's the best.
Oh,
I'll
okay,
totally
okay.
uncritically, I'll watch it and be like, oh, I nailed it.
Hey, that's good though. That means you love what you're doing and you know that it's working. I mean, if you didn't like it, you'd be like, nah, this shit. I'm just gonna edit it, make sure it looks like good, and then just it's done. But no, if you're sitting there watching over and over again as like a consumer, then
Yeah.
no, that's perfect. That's the best kind of
why I
content you make. Yeah, exactly. And it's crazy because you've been on like every part in every position of like filmmaking, like the acting, the directing, the writing, like every little part you have been a part of it. So what has been your favorite out of those three? I know that might be hard, but
Well, I don't want to discount how awesome acting was. I don't do it anymore.
fair.
Because when you get a good acting job, it's the best. It's really like winning the lottery. It's fun. It's easy. There's nothing bad about it. But you have to look at the whole picture. The lifestyle of an actor was not good for me psychologically. It made me, it fed into all of my insecurities about who I am. What do I look like? What does that mean? And it made me, it wasn't good for my mental health. So my first answer is like, no lie. Some of the acting gigs were just like too fun. But I would say as a whole person, directing has been by far the better choice for me. And then the best of all was it's really the last job for like 2018 to through 2022. I was in a show called Southside, and I was a director and a showrunner, and that was the pinnacle.
Yeah.
I'm fine retiring after having had that experience because that was the most freeing and fun and satisfying creative experience of my life by far. Great show.
Yeah, I
And
was actually gonna ask you about Southside. Like, can you give me like the down low on it, like what the show was about, and then like just your experience as directing it.
So when I went to Jimmy Fallon, I was a staff writer, and there were two other staff writers there. These guys, Bashir and Diallo, and we became friends. We were all baby late night writers. When it's a crucible, when you're a writer in late night, you're especially a brand new show like late night was, so Jimmy took over for Conan, and you have to prove yourself and figure out like what your voice is. And you're doing an hour of content a day that goes out not live, but you tape it at 5:30, it goes out at night. So it's when I showed up in New York, we were working together. Our first meeting of the day was at 9:30. We're at the office till midnight, go home, sleep a little bit, come back. The first 6 months, we worked every day, Saturdays and Sundays. And then we would start to take some weekends off. But for the first year and a half, we were together all the time. So that's 2009. Now, fast forward to 2017. And I when I left Jimmy Fallon, I had like a goal. I want to direct 50 episodes, 50 half hours. That was like I set this like sort of anal retentive numerical goal.
Mm-hmm.
And so I hit that number in 2016. And I also stopped enjoying directing for a lot of reasons. And I was like getting into arguments, and I don't know, the relish was gone. And I felt like I'm too fortunate to have this job to not be enjoying it. And I'm like doing myself a real disservice. So I'm going to take a year off and only work for free. I was like 2017. And I told him I was with my girlfriend, my wife now. And I said, I'm not going to have any income this year, but I'm going to work a lot. And coincidentally, Bashir and Diallo called and they said, hey, we sold this idea to Comedy Central, but we haven't really worked it out yet. And before we write the pilot, we want to go to Chicago and like shoot a sizzle proof of concept. Are you in? And I was like, you mean I get to work for free with you guys on something? This is like exactly what I want. So we sat in a coffee shop and they told a bunch of ideas that they wanted to do. And this like new working relationship developed where like they would riff out a scenario and then I would write it down and then we'd all turn it into like a script format. And if you just like extrapolate that, that's sort of how the TV show worked. We went to Chicago, we shot a sizzle, I DP'd it, I came home, I cut it, we showed it to the network. Bashir and Diallo wrote a script that was based on that. They had created with Bashir's brother, who like had originally incepted the show. Bashir's brother grew up with these two guys. You know, everyone in comedy is like, who's the funniest person you know in comedy? But then who's the funniest person you know? Different answer.
Right.
Funniest person you know in comedy might be like anywhere from, I don't know, Jason Nash, Mitch Hedberg, Bill Hicks, whoever is like your funniest comedy person. But like the funniest person in my life is like, you know, some cousin who like works at Meineke mufflers, but like never went into business. And so Bashir's brother, Sultan, had these two twins that had worked at a rent to own furniture rental, which is like essentially rent to own is Rent-A-Center. It's essentially a predatory lending organization where they get you to commit to own to make payments on something, and you don't accrue any equity in the couch or whatever. And if you miss any payments, they come and take it from you, and all your equity's gone. And so like most of their jobs of the twins that was like repossessing furniture from people who hadn't made their payments. And so that's like that's Bashir and Diallo said, we want to do a show that's set in this like fake Rent-A-Center where it's based on our friends growing up who are the funniest people we knew growing up, but like they work in a Rent-A-Center.
Yeah.
And I had a phone call with Quincy and Kareem, the twins, one day in like 2016. And, you know, they're like two gentlemen from the South Side, and they started telling stories. And it's like, again, I talk about your life unfolding in waves where the outcome is predetermined. And I knew on that call, before we made the sizzle reel, I was like, this show will get on the air. It's ours to fuck up.
Right.
I just feel like there are times in my life where I have a crystal ball. I don't know how I get it, but that was one of those moments. In fact, I was so certain of that after we made the pilot, I started getting calls for work. This was probably fall of 2018. And, you know, there's no pickup, but I got a couple directing offers for like later that year. And I was like, just so you know, I know the show's going to get picked up. I don't have any inside line, but like, I'm going to be full-time on something probably in the fall. I just want you to know that. And everyone's like, they respect it. They're like, okay, well then we won't hire you. I'm like, you know, you can hire me if you know I might leave.
Right. And
so I got no jobs, and Southside got picked up, and that was my job. But we were off and running for the next 3 seasons. But that's what the show is. The show, I mean, what's so great about the show is that, you know, like the fundamental conundrum of being like from a economically disadvantaged area like the South Side is that you can never leave. I mean, people leave, but like that is the conundrum, is it's difficult to achieve your way out through financial success. Well,
Right.
you know what that's perfect for? It's perfect for a sitcom character, because the what's ideal in a sitcom character is that a sitcom character never transcends who they are as a character. And so the world resets after every episode. Like Costanza might get a job with the Yankees, but like he's still Costanza, and he'll still fuck it up and become Costanza again by the end of the episode.
Yeah,
And
100%.
so as like an inherent structure to a situational comedy character, having people who are trapped, they aspire, but they can't escape like their basic model. That's like perfect for a sitcom. And so I knew that like all the trappings of like what made a sitcom great were like there for me structurally. I know that's like somewhat of an academic approach, but I just felt like the comedy's there because Bashir and Diallo are hysterical, and the structure was there to make a show. And then then we did 3 seasons of that.
That's awesome. That's really cool. And it's cool that, and like you said, it's like once one domino falls, they all fall. It's like you just kept having one thing after another, and it just worked out so perfectly. Like you had mentioned about taking the year off to work, and then all of a sudden you get this call, hey, do you want to be a part of this? Like it is really cool how that's worked out for you. You don't hear that a lot with a lot of people.
Yeah, that was pretty lucky. But you have to, if you're going to make a change in your life, the first step in like changing it up is creating an open space for that change. I remember reading an article. I was in a post house, and like sometimes you show up to a post house and like, oh, your room isn't ready. So sitting in the lobby, and they've got like all these industry magazines laying around, and picked one up and was reading an article about a DP who wanted to be a director. And he's like, before he started working as a director, he had to start turning down DP work. And then there was this line that like was burned into my brain. He's like, before you can move on to something new, you have to alienate people who know you from the old thing. He said it better than that.
Fair. That's fair. No, that makes sense. So that's fair.
So like, yeah. So like before you can like have something awesome and new, if you want to date someone new, you kind of have to break up with the person you're with. So like I had to start turning everything down, and then there was like space to do the thing that I want to do. I mean, the Bashir and Diallo sizzle reel wasn't the only thing I did that year. I made a lot of stuff, but that was like one, and it worked.
Right, exactly. I have a few more things before I let you go. Obviously, we had mentioned earlier about Zoey 101. It's funny that like you were only like, to me, 6 or I think it was 7 episodes you were in. I don't know why, but when I think of your character, I think of you being in like way more than that. I don't know what it is. Maybe it's just because I was a kid and I haven't watched Zoey 101 in a while. But like I felt like you were in a lot more. Was it the first season you were in?
I think I'm in seasons 1 and 2.
1 and 2. Okay. Yeah, maybe they were shortened. But yeah, I don't know what it was. I felt like you were in a lot more than that. So you were mentioning about the never thinking you'd be on a kid's show. And then you obviously worked with Jamie Lynn Spears. And obviously at the time she was just Britney Spears' little sister. But like, what was the experience like working with her and like the rest of the kids? Because it was literally you and a bunch of kids. So it was like you had said, wasn't something you were used to.
Yeah, like I didn't want to like be too enamored of them, because I felt like I needed to maintain my like
authority,
my status within my own mind. But like she was clearly in charge of that set. Like Jamie Lynn was, and my memories are hazy, but I remember recognizing that within that child was essentially the CEO of that production, and that she was aware of it, and that she was very cagey and very smart, and that she didn't expend any energy that she didn't need to. And I felt like, and I think I was intimidated by it, and probably a little bit like, if I'm being honest, like resentful, like who's this 13-year-old that like obviously has way more authority than I do. But that was undeniably the reality. I was very impressed with her as a business person.
But I don't get like how did she have like that status then? Because she was in nothing else. Was it because of her sister?
I'll tell you, I'm going to give you kind of a spiritual answer, but I've like put a lot of thought into what defines authority on a TV set or a movie set. And authority at the end of the day comes from inside of you, and you can have just as much authority as you can like get away with having. If you think that you run it and people buy into it, then you'll run the set. And I think she just felt like she ran it. And one thing about children actors is that they actually, one thing that I'm not like, don't want my kids to be actors, is that it creates an inverse power differential where the child is in charge of the adults, and the adults constantly demonstrate how in charge the child is. And I think it makes the child feel unsafe, and it makes them very powerful. And I don't think a child should have that much political control at too young of an age. And I think she just had the control and she knew it. And I don't think she abused it. She just, it came from I didn't know who she was, but it was like, you walk onto a set and you're like, holy shit, this person is running the show.
Yeah. I mean, it makes it's hard to blame her when the show's about her. She has her sister at the time was one of the most famous people in the world. So, I mean, I can kind of see where that I don't want to say ego, but like where that authority would come from.
It totally comes from within.
Did you ever see her have any ego?
Not really.
No.
I remember like having no real contact with her.
Yeah.
She was like very businesslike. But like
so weird for a 13-year-old.
Yeah, it was weird, but there was like nothing like salacious. She was just like in control, and she like played her cards very close to her chest. And I never saw like a moment that I can remember where she was like, "Oh, there's a goofy 13-year-old just fucking around.
Right.
Come on, guys, we got a show. Come on, children." It wasn't like that. She was like down to business.
Interesting.
Yeah.
The movie that they ended up coming out with, I think it was last year. Did you have any idea about the movie? Were you thinking maybe I would like be asked to be in it? No.
You telling me about it right now is the first I've heard that it happened.
You're lying.
No.
You didn't know there was a Zoey 102 movie?
No.
No way. Yeah, there was. It was Quinn and Logan get married. Yeah, that's so funny that you didn't know that. I mean, obviously, it's not like you watched the show, but at the end of the show, close to like the last season, I think, Quinn and Logan end up dating. And then, yeah, the movie begins with Quinn asking Zoey to be her maid of honor. And then, yeah, they get married. Everyone has like a reunion together. That's so funny that you've never even heard of it. Wow. Interesting. I mean, and almost everyone was like, out of the main cast was back, I think, besides Zoe's brother. I'm having a brain fart. What his name is? Paul. I can't remember. Her little brother, and then Victoria Justice, and then Nicole. I can't remember her real name either. Anyways, there's about 3 of them that weren't in it, and then obviously you weren't in it. But that's so funny that you never even heard about the movie.
No, I didn't.
Oh my god! Hey, you're not kidding when you say,
why was Bender not in it?
Yeah, exactly. See, I was wondering that when I watched it. I thought like he'd make a cameo, like, or like even the Dean. That's so funny that you never even heard of it. Say, you're telling the truth when you say you don't watch anything, or you're not on social media much. I mean, when I found you on Twitter, I'm like, wow, how does this guy only have this many followers? I was
I was on as myself when I went to Jimmy Fallon was really into Twitter, and so I started writing jokes as I was at Blieden in 2009, and like. I enjoyed Twitter, and I played the game of whatever it was to amass followers. And then I'll tell you what broke me was when Trump got elected, I just like withdrew from everything. I was like too engaged in my political identity.
Fair.
And I sort of took a step back and was like, whatever's happening here, it's not additive to my life. I don't feel good. And people are being mean to me, and I'm being mean to people, and I don't think it's good for me, and I don't think it's good for them. So I deleted the account, gave it all up, and I pretty much never went back. I really only established my at Michael Blieden like just in case there was someone who needed to reach me who didn't, like essentially for a situation like this where I was like, I think professionally I need to have some way to be reached, but
right. Yeah. No, what was, I don't even think like, it's like in the hundreds of followers you have. Like, I was really surprised, but that makes sense that you had one where you had grown with the followers and then you deleted it. Well, that makes sense then.
Yeah.
And I don't blame you. It like, especially since it turned into X, it has just gotten into a wasteland. It's not the same as it used to be. And like, it is coming from someone that's only had it since like 2012, I think, 2013. But yeah, it's definitely not the same as it was.
I think like to be an omnivore on social media is bad for you. And by omnivore, I mean, I'm here as myself and I'm open to any topic. When you like when you read a tweet, you're essentially allowing someone to execute code in your brain, and you're letting anything in, and you have no control over, like, you have no firewall. And so to be like open to whatever's out there, I think is damaging for one's psychology. And I saw it having a really negative effect on me. So I just don't think people should just be like, I don't think people should be themselves on social media. I think that's like, has become a weird accountability that I think is like not fair. Yeah. And then I think for like your ability to think and process the world, I think it's like, I don't know. I don't think it's good for people.
That's fair. And like, yeah, and especially if like you're way too personal on there, then that gives more ammo to people and stuff. So yeah, it can, social media in general is like, there's a lot of good things about it, but there can also be a lot of dark things about it as well. And
what was great about it when we all started it was you could be very personal. And that was like so sweet, you know. I could say something very personal and, you know, there might be 1,000 people who like responded. And I felt like it was still safe. So now that becomes a decade later, that becomes a liability.
Yeah,
it's put all that out there.
How much can change?
Yeah,
that's nuts. What was there was one? Oh, the last thing, and then I'm gonna let you have the floor to promote anything you want. If they had asked you to be in the movie, would you have been in it, Zoey 102?
Oh yeah, of course. Yeah, for
okay.
Sure.
Hey, I was gonna ask that earlier and I forgot, but I can't get over that you had no idea about it. I love that so much. But yeah, Michael, before I let you go, the floor is yours to promote anything you'd like. Yeah, what do you have going on right now?
This director came to me a couple years ago. He was working on a documentary about Mitch Hedberg. And I had filmed Hedberg like a few months before he died. Comedy Central paid me to go on the road with him just to see what I would get. They were thinking about doing a reality show with him in 2004. And the experience was like very, very emotional because it was clear he had a problem. And I felt like he might not be around. He was extremely gracious with me. He totally opened up to me about his drug problem. I recorded all of it. We had this incredible interview in his RV driving. Are you a Hedberg fan? Do you know Hedberg at all?
I don't.
So he's a comic. Look up two of his biggest albums are he has an album called Strategic Grill Locations. It's very accessible. And then he's got another album called Mitch Altogether. It's like went gold, but
wow,
it's like a comedian that was like one of the greatest one-liner comedians of all time. And he OD'd in 2005. He had a heroin overdose, but like, that's, you know, this story of a comic. Anyway, I was like very moved by this experience. Comedy Central, obviously, by the way, there would have been a great reality show, but it was clear that he needed rehab. So you know, it would have been immoral to do. But I didn't really cross over with Mitch's story until around 2022. This guy named Jeff Siegel was like, I've been obsessed with Hedberg since high school. And now I'm a 40-year-old director who works in documentaries, and I'm doing a documentary about Mitch's life. And I started advising him like for a couple years because, you know, like I had done a lot of comedy and a lot of specials, and he had come from like dramatic, unscripted Netflix like series. Wow. So I just gave him some like advice, and we got a lot closer over a couple years. And then last summer I was like, you know, I want to see everything you've shot. I mean, he'd been working on this for about 3 years, just flying around the country, interviewing all of Mitch's friends. And so he actually came into this office and he told me Mitch's life story. It took him 3 days. He had this document that's like a book, and he'd written what happened to Mitch from the time he was born up until the day he died.
Wow.
And I was like so intrigued by this story. And with Jeff's work, essentially as an investigative journalist who had like written this beautiful, funny story that was all true.
Yeah.
And he'd gotten it by collecting all these interviews from, 40 or 50 people. And I was like, let me see your interviews. We watched his interviews. And I was like, let's go reshoot everything that you shot and like make it a project, and I'll get involved. And so I've been like getting back to my roots. I'm DPing now for another director, and we're just going on the road and shooting this documentary, and it's like super engaging, and it's really bringing me back to like being on the road with Patton and Zach, waking up in a hotel room with a camera, only it's a different camera now.
Yeah.
I'm a Red user. Tried
a little bit better now.
Yeah. But that's the thing. So will this come out? Yeah, someday. It's a couple years out. It's a long process.
Right.
But I'm something I'm producing. I'm not the director.
That's awesome. That's cool. And it's cool that like you're still you're flip-flopping between producing and directing. You're not just doing one. So it's nice to see that you're still kind of getting your hand into everything. So, but yeah, Michael, thank you so much for coming on here. I really appreciate it. It was really fun to bug you and ask you some silly questions the last hour and a bit. So yeah, thank you so much for coming on here. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, man. This was really a lot of fun.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
Well, you're a great interviewer. You've got like a lot of charm. You're very prepared, very engaging.
Thank
really
you.
Good job.
Yeah, I'll send you that money after for all the compliments.
You got it.
Yeah. All right, I'll talk to you later, Michael.
All right, dude. Bye.
See ya.
And that was the Quinn Marr Show.